This Feeling by LeilahMoon, read by Ella Mabella. Chapter 5. Hermione woke early to fetch some toast from the Great Hall before heading back to the common room to wait for Harry. As she neared the portrait hall, she came face to face with him hurriedly stepping out. "Hello," she said, holding up a breakfast offering. "I brought you this. Want to go for a walk?" "Yes, please," he replied gratefully. They went downstairs, crossed the entrance hall, and were soon striding across the lawn towards the lake. It was a cold morning, but they kept moving, munching their toast, as Harry told Hermione exactly what had happened after he had left the Gryffindor table the night before. "Well, of course I knew you hadn't entered yourself," she said when he'd finally finished telling her about the scene in the portrait room of the hall. "As I told Ron, the look on your face when Dumbledore read out your name. But the question is, who did put it in? Moody's right, Harry. I don't think any student could have done it. They'd never be able to fool the goblet or get over Dumbledore's age line." "Have you seen Ron this morning?" Harry asked abruptly. Hermione hesitated. Yes, he was at breakfast." "Does he still think I entered myself?" "Well, no, I don't think so," she said awkwardly. "Not really." "What's that supposed to mean, not really?" "Oh, Harry, isn't it obvious? He's jealous." "Jealous?" Harry cried. "Jealous of what? He wants to make a prat of himself in front of the whole school, does he?" "Look," said Hermione patiently, "it's always you who gets all the attention. You know it is. I know it's not your fault," she added quickly, seeing Harry open his mouth furiously. "I know you don't ask for it, but, well, you know, Ron's got all those brothers to compete against at home, and you're his best friend, and you're really famous. He's always shunted to one side whenever people see you, and he puts up with it, and he never mentions it, but I suppose this is just one time too many." "Great," said Harry bitterly. "Really great. Tell him from me I'll swap any time he wants. Tell him he's welcome to it. People gulping at my forehead everywhere I go. I'm not telling him anything. Tell him yourself. It's the only way to sort it." "No, I'm not running after him, trying to make him grow up." Hermione sighed, but she understood where Harry was coming from. It really wasn't fair for Ron to blame him, but she knew from first-hand experience how stubborn they both could be. As time went on, Hermione became even more keenly aware of how difficult things were for Harry since the announcement. The Hufflepuffs, who were usually on excellent terms with the Gryffindors, had turned remarkably cold towards the whole lot of them. Under normal circumstances, she and Harry would be looking forward to seeing Hagrid in care of magical creatures, but unfortunately, they still had this class with the Slytherins. Hermione knew that Draco would have been devising ways to taunt Harry, and she was too tired to deal with it. Since Harry had been named a champion, she had had to sit between him and Ron in every lesson. Although they both answered her normally, they avoided making eye contact with each other, and their conversation was very forced. Predictably, Draco sauntered over to the three of them. Hermione noticed his carefully positioned sneer. "Ah, look, boys, it's the champion," he said to Crabbe and Goyle the moment he got within earshot of Harry. "Are you scared you might lose the prestigious title of Boy Who Lived if you don't continually fling yourself into life-threatening situations, Potter?" Fortunately, Draco had to stop there because Hagrid emerged from the back of his cabin. Hermione sighed with relief. Hermione sat herself in their nook a few evenings later. She was trying not to feel hurt, but it wasn't really working. Harry had confided in her that the past few days had been his worst at Hogwarts. He was feeling lonely and ostracized. From her own past experience, Hermione understood this. What she found difficult was Harry's insistence that Ron had to be by his side in order to cope. Throughout the whole ordeal, she had tried her best to support and distract him, but apparently that wasn't enough. "You're right, Granger," said Draco, strolling over. She shrugged. No one had asked her this question for quite some time. It caused tears to begin welling up behind her eyes. "Hermione," he said more gently this time, sitting next to her. Everything spilled out quickly. "They've ignored me for weeks at a time, but I don't think they ever felt so lonely because of it. So Harry feels lonely without Ron, but doesn't care when I'm not there, or actually still feels lonely when I am there." I'm sorry, Draco said, reaching out for her. You know I don't like them, but there's no excuse for the way they treat you sometimes. Hermione laced her fingers through his and gazed down at their entwined hands, surprised at how normal it felt. Do you feel the same as Harry and Ron? Does it matter to you whether I'm around or not? She asked. The butterflies in Draco's stomach began to waltz. Of course it does. There's nothing I want more than to be with you. Her heart leapt into her throat. They'd never spoken like this before. Really? Yes, Hermione. Sometimes I wonder whether they just see you as a constant. They always assume you're going to be there. For me, well, I don't take you for granted. Every moment I spend with you, it's important. They looked at each other. For the second time, she wished for the strength to lean in closer. Their lips were just centimeters apart, but it felt like miles. Instead, she changed the subject. Putting her hands on her hips in mock annoyance, she said, So, what happened to my badgers, Malfoy? Oh, yeah, Potter stings, he chuckled. He deserves it. She rolled her eyes and huffed. Impressive charm work, though, right? Draco said, smiling proudly. Hermione couldn't help but laugh. 5 points to Slytherin. Chapter 6. Hermione was torn between either killing Draco Malfoy or finally kissing him. The Gryffindors and Slytherins had been waiting outside Snape's dungeons when he and Harry began drawing their wand at each other. Go on then, Potter, Draco said quietly. Moody's not here to look after you now. Do it, if you've got the guts. For a split second, they looked into each other's eyes, and then, at exactly the same time, both acted. "Furnunculus!" Harry yelled. "Then Zorgo!" screamed Draco. Jets of light shot from both wands hit each other in mid-air and ricocheted off at angles. Harry hit Goyle in the face, and Draco's hit Hermione. Goyle bellowed and put his hands to his nose, where great ugly boils were springing up. Hermione, whimpering in panic, clutched her mouth. Thus, here she was, yet again in the hospital wing. Draco's spell had caused her front teeth to grow at an alarming rate. After Snape's derogatory comments, she had raced immediately to Madame Pomfrey. When the matron began to shrink her teeth and told Hermione to say stop when they were back to how they normally were, she just let her carry on a bit. Hermione wasn't sure how Draco had managed to wait outside the ward for her without being spotted, but there he was, leaning against the wall and looking frustratingly attractive. As soon as she walked into the corridor, he stood bolt upright. "You're all right." "Yes, clearly," she replied, marching away. "Please, Hermione, I didn't mean to." "I realized that." Whilst overall she was feeling very pleased with her current dental situation, she wasn't going to let him get away with hexing her that easily. Not even checking for other people, Draco caught Hermione's arm to prevent her from racing off. "What can I do to make it up to you?" "I'll have a think and let you know." Hermione flounced down the corridor, sending him a smirk over her shoulder. Draco groaned. He'd created a monster. The evening of the first task came around alarmingly fast. Hermione was walking down the stadium reflecting on the whirlwind that had been the last few days. Harry had come to her on Sunday morning and explained all about the dragons he had witnessed in the Forbidden Forest. They had spent every moment since then in the library, desperately trying to think of a spell that would subdue such a creature, and not been particularly successful. Luckily, Professor Moody had shared some last-minute wisdom with Harry, and as such, she had spent hours with him the previous night practicing a summoning charm. It was after 2 a.m. before they headed to bed, so Hermione was exhausted and filled with anxious energy. She and Ron filed into their seats with the other Gryffindors. The stands overlooked a large enclosure of jagged rocks, tree stumps, and other dangerous-looking debris. Clutching her hands together in terror, Hermione watched as Cedric, Fleur, Victor, and lastly Harry faced their respective dragons. She kept glancing at Ron, who was turning increasingly ashen. Maneuvering herself closer to him, Hermione bumped his shoulder, and he smiled at her gratefully. When Harry was caught by the Hungarian horntail's long spikes, Hermione gasped audibly and unconsciously gripped Ron's knee. Draco was glowering a few rows behind them. He wished he could breathe fire too. Finally, it was over. The crowd cheered and applauded. "Look at that!" Bagman was yelling. "Will you look at that? Our youngest champion is the quickest to get his egg." Hermione stood up and, dragging Ron with her, raced to the champion's tent. Harry, you were brilliant! But he was looking at Ron, who was still incredibly pale. Harry, he said very seriously, whoever put your name in that goblet, I reckon they're trying to do you in. Caught on, have you? He replied coolly. Took you long enough. Hermione stood nervously between them, looking from one to the other. Ron opened his mouth uncertainly. It's okay, Harry said before Ron could get any words out. Forget it. No, I shouldn't have. Honestly, forget it. Ron grinned hesitantly at him, and Harry mirrored the expression. Hermione, on the other hand, flung her arms around both of them. You two are so stupid, she cried. After the scores had been announced, the three strolled back up to the castle together, Hermione bouncing happily in the middle of them. Draco was becoming increasingly frustrated with Victor Krum. Since the first task, every time he sought Hermione out in their library nook, said Quidditch player was always lurking. He didn't think Krum had ever actually gone to sit with her, but his perpetual presence ensured that Draco could never take his usual seat. After a few days of this, he decided to make a stand. Prior to entering the library, Draco informed a group of giggling girls that Victor Krum was in there, and without further encouragement, they rushed inside. Less than 5 minutes later, the champion made his great escape. Draco smirked and sauntered over to his rightful position beside Hermione. Granger, he nodded. She rolled her eyes, but smiled. Malfoy. Why is Krum hanging out here so much? Hermione couldn't prevent the furious blush that crept into her cheeks. Oh, no reason. You're quite clearly lying. Well, he asked me to be his date to the duel ball. Draco's heart plummeted as he stared at her. He supposed he should have expected it. Are you okay? She queried. You look like you might be having some sort of seizure. Yes, fine. I'll be going with Pansy, I imagine. It was Hermione's turn to stare. Her eye twitched slightly. Oh, yes. Lovely. Draco had been sat for less than 10 minutes, but stood abruptly and cleared his throat. Right, well, I best be off. Good night. She watched him practically hurl himself from the library. Hermione wasn't inclined to stop him. To be continued. Thank you for listening to today's chapters of This Feeling by LeilahMoon, read by LMXMabella. If you would like to stay up to date on upcoming chapters and stories, you can follow me on YouTube, Spotify, AO3, Instagram, or Tumblr.